On a cold, rainy Halloween night in 1974, in the quiet suburban neighborhood of Deer Park, Texas, a sinister crime unfolded. It was a night meant for fun, where children roamed the streets in costumes, their laughter filling the air as they collected candy. Among these children were 8-year-old Timothy O'Bryan and his sister Elizabeth, accompanied by their father, Ronald Clark O'Bryan, and a neighbor. What seemed like an ordinary night of trick-or-treating quickly turned into a horrific tragedy that shocked the nation and left parents terrified for their children's safety. The night began innocently enough. On October 31st, 1974, Ronald took Timothy and Elizabeth trick-or-treating in a nearby neighborhood. They were joined by their neighbor Jim Bates and his children. The group went door to door, gathering candy, but there was a moment of frustration when they knocked on a house where the lights were off and no one answered. The group started to walk away, assuming the residents weren't home, but Ronald stayed behind for a moment. When Ronald caught up with the group, he held 5 large Pixy Stix in his hand. He told the children that someone had answered the door after all and had given him the candy. Excited, the kids each took one of the powdered candy straws, which were stapled shut at the top, and continued their night. When the group returned home, the children eagerly poured out their candy and began inspecting their haul. Ronald encouraged his children to try the Pixy Stix, making it a special treat before bed. Timothy, eager to eat the candy, had trouble opening the staple at the top, and his father helped him. The boy poured the powder into his mouth, but immediately complained that it tasted bitter. Ronald handed him some Kool-Aid to wash away the taste, but within moments, Timothy began to experience intense pain, clutching his stomach and vomiting violently. As Timothy writhed in agony, Ronald called for help, feigning panic. The paramedics arrived, but there was little they could do. Timothy was rushed to the hospital, but tragically, he died en route. His death came less than an hour after ingesting the poisoned Pixy Stix. The O'Bryan family was devastated, or so it seemed. Ronald, in particular, played the part of a grieving father, wailing uncontrollably and blaming the unknown assailant who had supposedly tampered with the candy. The news of Timothy's death sent shockwaves through the local community and beyond. Parents became terrified that other candy had been poisoned, and hospitals and police stations were flooded with calls from panicked families. Law enforcement scrambled to retrieve and examine candy from the trick-or-treaters who had been with the O'Bryans. The other children, including Elizabeth, were saved only because they hadn't opened their Pixy Stix. While the initial reaction was one of sympathy for the O'Bryan family, authorities soon grew suspicious of Ronald's behavior. Detectives noticed that he was not as grief-stricken as one would expect from a father who had just lost a child. Besides, no other cases of poisoned candy were reported, despite the widespread fear. The investigators began to look closer at Ronald and uncovered the massive life insurance policies he had recently taken out on his children. As police delved deeper into Ronald's finances, the motive became clearer. Ronald was heavily in debt, owing more than $100,000, and was on the brink of losing everything. His solution to his financial problems was chilling. He had intended to kill his son for insurance money. Investigators also learned that Ronald had inquired with multiple chemical supply companies about purchasing cyanide in the months leading up to Halloween. With mounting evidence against Ronald, the police turned their attention to the source of the cyanide. Several witnesses testified that O'Bryan had been asking strange questions about the lethal substance, including how much would be needed to kill a person. Ronald had also visited a local chemical supply store, but left without purchasing anything when he couldn't buy the cyanide in small quantities. Investigators theorized that he had eventually obtained the poison through other means, though the exact source was never definitively proven. In a stroke of luck, the police managed to recover the 4 other Pixy Stix Ronald had given out. One of the children, who had received the candy from Ronald, had been found sleeping with the Pixy Stix clutched in his hand. The staple at the top prevented him from opening it, likely saving his life. Tests confirmed that the top 2 inches of the candy straw were packed with cyanide, more than enough to kill an adult, let alone a child. As the pieces of the puzzle came together, Ronald Clark O'Bryan was arrested on November 5, 1974, just days after Timothy's funeral. The notion that a father could coldly and deliberately poison his own child for financial gain was unfathomable. The public had initially been horrified at the idea of random poisoned Halloween candy, but the truth was far more disturbing. This was an act of intimate betrayal, perpetrated by the very person responsible for Timothy's protection. Ronald's trial began in May 1975. The prosecution painted him as a cold, calculating man who had planned his son's murder for months. They presented overwhelming evidence: the life insurance policies, his inquiries about cyanide, and the fact that only the children in his care had received the poisoned candy. Ronald's defense, however, argued that he was a victim of a cruel frame-up, maintaining his innocence throughout the proceedings. Witnesses were a key part of the prosecution's case. Friends, colleagues, and chemical suppliers all testified about Ronald's unusual interest in cyanide and life insurance. A co-worker recalled how Ronald had asked him about cyanide weeks before Halloween, while another witness testified that O'Bryan had remarked that it would take just a small amount of poison to kill someone. Each testimony painted a damning picture of a man who had meticulously plotted the murder of his son. The fear generated by Ronald O'Bryan's crime spread nationwide. For many, Halloween would never be the same again. Although no widespread cases of poisoned Halloween candy ever materialized, the idea that a parent could commit such an act of violence against their own child led to increased caution. Hospitals began offering X-ray services to scan candy for dangerous objects, and parents began accompanying their children more closely during trick-or-treating. The carefree spirit of Halloween was forever tainted by this single act of evilness. The O'Bryan family, devastated by the loss of Timothy and the betrayal of Ronald, never fully recovered. Ronald's wife, Dainine, divorced him shortly after his arrest, and she had to face the horrific reality that her husband had tried to murder both their children. Elizabeth, who had narrowly escaped the same fate as her brother, grew up with the shadow of the crime looming over her life. The media frenzy surrounding the case was intense, with headlines calling O'Bryan the Candyman and the man who killed Halloween. His crime was seen as particularly insidious because of the way it targeted children during a beloved holiday. Documentaries, books, and news specials have since covered the case, dissecting every aspect of the crime and trial, ensuring that Ronald's story remains part of the public consciousness. Psychologists have studied Ronald O'Bryan's case to understand what could drive a father to commit such a crime. Some have theorized that his overwhelming financial stress triggered a psychopathic disregard for life, especially his own children's. Others suggest that his cold, emotionless demeanor during the trial indicates a deep-seated inability to feel empathy, making him capable of such an unspeakable act without remorse. The case of Ronald Clark O'Bryan is a chilling reminder of the capacity for evil that can hide behind a mask of normalcy. A father, a churchgoer, and a trusted member of the community, O'Bryan shattered the illusion of safety that Halloween once held. His crime not only took the life of his innocent son, but it also forever changed how Americans approach the holiday. His story serves as a dark lesson in the dangers of greed, betrayal, and the devastating consequences of one man's desperate choices.